your feet firmly. Hello, boy.
The world watched them bring laughter into living rooms across America. Jackie Gleason, with his booming voice as Ralph Cramden, Audrey Meadows, sharp and steady as Alice, and Art Carney's Ed Norton, the unpredictable wild card who somehow stole every single scene. Together, they built a comedy classic that would echo for generations. To fans, their chemistry seemed effortless. On screen, they felt like family. But once the cameras stopped rolling, that illusion shattered quietly. One man disappeared into the shadows, Art Carney. No celebratory reunions, no joint interviews, no final goodbyes, and perhaps the most confounding part? He never spoke to Audrey Meadows again. Not once. What really happened behind the scenes of television's golden trio? Back in 1955, when the Honeymooners debuted, the country was hooked from the very first punchline. With only 39 episodes, it managed to reshape the landscape of American comedy forever. Ralph, the dreamer in a bus driver's uniform, and Alice, his no-nonsense wife with a heart beneath the sarcasm, were magnetic. But the secret weapon of the show? Ed Norton, Ralph's eccentric upstairs neighbor. Carney's bizarre yet endearing mannerisms made him instantly unforgettable. Audiences were captivated. He wasn't just funny, he was magic. He even snagged an Emmy for his performance, becoming a household name practically overnight. To viewers, the trio seemed inseparable, like lifelong friends just being themselves in front of a camera. But beneath that charm was a reality far less warm. Jackie Gleason could be intense, brilliant, but temperamental. Audrey Meadows, quick-witted and unafraid, matched his energy. And then there was Carney, the quiet one, the enigma. He'd show up, hit every mark, deliver comedic gold, then vanish the moment filming wrapped. While Gleason and Meadows were often seen mingling or discussing scenes, Carney kept to himself, barely exchanging small talk. That distance wasn't just temporary. It lasted for decades. There were no shared red carpet photos, no nostalgic gatherings. And when tributes rolled around, Art Carney's name was consistently missing from the guest lists. Fans assumed it was just his preference for privacy, but the silence between him and Meadows suggested something deeper. She spoke fondly of their time together, of the cast, and the magic they created. Carney? He never once mentioned her. And when Audrey passed away in 1996, the world waited for his statement. A quote, a reflection, anything. But there was nothing. Not even a word. That silence struck fans like a ghost echo in an empty theater. Why did he stay so silent? Why withdraw so completely from the show that defined his early fame? As it turns out, the roots of that distance may have run deeper than anyone realized. From the outside, Carney and Meadows were both consummate professionals. They didn't stir up drama or demand attention. But professionalism doesn't guarantee camaraderie. Insiders describe a dynamic that was more mechanical than familial. Jackie Gleason ran the set with the kind of authority that could make collaboration feel like survival. He was known to rewrite scripts on a whim and skip rehearsals, trusting his instincts. Audrey could keep up. Her experience with live television gave her an edge. But Carney? The chaos took a toll. What the public didn't see was Carney's internal struggle. He battled with anxiety his entire life, paired with quiet battles against addiction. The intensity of Gleason's unfiltered style and the high-stakes nature of live taping weighed heavily on him. He never missed a performance, but the emotional cost was steep. Colleagues noted how Carney avoided emotional interactions off-camera, especially with co-stars like Meadows. There were whispers that her sharp comedic timing occasionally eclipsed his in rehearsal, causing subtle friction. Not arguments, just quiet distance. And Gleason, intentionally or not, seemed to keep the cast slightly isolated from one another, perhaps to retain control over the creative chemistry. Audrey was open, articulate, and candid in interviews. She shared stories, gave praise, and offered insight into her time on the show. Carney acted like it never happened. He was invited to tribute shows, anniversary specials, retrospective interviews. He turned them all down. Even Gleason, for all his larger-than-life flaws, often spoke of Carney with admiration. He called him irreplaceable, a comedic genius. Audrey Meadows echoed that praise in every interview she gave. But Carney? He never returned the compliment. He didn't criticize. He didn't lash out. He simply said nothing at all. That silence became its own statement. A lingering question mark over a legacy that could have been remembered together. He didn't fade from fame. He walked away from it intentionally and quietly, as if every round of applause made him shrink just a little more. Art Carney, who once lit up living rooms with just a look or a line, became the actor no one could find. Not on talk shows, not in old friends' memories, and certainly not standing beside Audrey Meadows, even when the world waited for it. At the very moment nostalgia could have bridged the years, he stepped back and let silence speak. And in that silence, people began to ask not just where Carney went, but why he chose not to look back. There's something quietly haunting about a man whose genius was never loud, who never chased awards but still won them, who brought laughter to millions and yet struggled to laugh freely himself. Carney's departure from the limelight wasn't bitter, it was almost poetic, but that same poetry carried sorrow, especially when it came to Audrey. They shared a stage, built a legacy together, yet remained strangers in the years that followed. No public memories, no chance encounters recounted, no kind words exchanged after the show ended. It's as if the curtain dropped, and Carney never looked back. Not once. But a quiet mystery deepened when Audrey's words from old interviews resurfaced. She had always been gracious in public, the kind of performer who respected the craft and everyone she worked with. Yet when the name Art Carney came up, her tone would change. Gentle, measured, almost wistful. In her memoir, Love, Alice, she wrote warmly of the show's pace, Gleason's energy, and the thrill of live taping. But on Carney, just one phrase stood out. We worked well together. No stories, no laughter, no personal recollections. It was the kind of statement people give when they're holding back, or when they've given up trying to explain something too delicate to touch. And then came that long-forgotten interview from the early 90s, the one where she paused before answering a simple question. What was your relationship with Art Carney like after the show? She looked down, gave a small smile, and answered with a truth that hit harder than any dramatic reveal. I don't think Art was ever really comfortable around anyone, not even himself. That single sentence cracked open a story that was never fully told. Not by Carney, and not by anyone else. But its echo said more than pages ever could. Sometimes the biggest mysteries in Hollywood aren't the scandals, they're the silences. And this was one of them. Fans believed they knew the cast of the Honeymooners, but they only saw the surface. Behind the applause, behind the perfectly timed comedy, there were quiet tensions, unseen distance, and unspoken regrets. Jackie Gleason, for all his bluster, made peace with his castmates. Audrey embraced the show's legacy with grace. But Carney? He remained the ghost in the room, the face in the credits. The name rarely spoken aloud. Yet there's one more piece of the puzzle. An incident few knew about until much later. In 1961, Just a few years after the show ended, Carney suffered what his family would later describe as an emotional breakdown. To the public, he was simply resting. But behind closed doors, things were unraveling. He was overwhelmed, battling inner storms that had quietly brewed through years of stage lights and forced smiles. He didn't lash out, he withdrew. And that withdrawal became his coping mechanism for life. The man who played Ed Norton with such warmth and humor was, in truth, deeply fragile. Friends later revealed he feared confrontation so much, he would leave rooms mid-conversation if things got too personal. He masked discomfort with humor, deflected praise with humility, and ducked from the very fame that made him iconic. And as his star rose, his connections thinned. Even those who tried to stay close found themselves shut out. Not with anger, but with distance. It wasn't personal. It was survival. By the late 60s, Carney had begun to rebuild, quietly and cautiously. He acted again, took on roles that challenged him emotionally, and in 1975, shocked the world by winning the Academy Award for Harry and Tonto. But even in victory, he stayed reserved. In interviews, he avoided personal questions. When asked about the Honeymooners, he kept it brief, almost clinical. His performance, not the experience, was what he acknowledged. And the people? They were left out of the story entirely. This was especially striking given how warmly Jackie Gleason remembered him. Gleason, never known for humility, often credited Carney for grounding the show with his subtle genius. He once called Art the quiet force behind everything that worked. Audrey, too, always included Carney in her praise, never bitter, just quietly respectful. But he never returned the favor. Not in interviews, not in public, not even in passing. And when Audrey Meadows passed in 1996, the silence that followed from Carney wasn't just noticeable, it was jarring. Fans waited. The press asked, but nothing came. Not a line, not a comment. It was as though he had buried that chapter so deeply, he couldn't, or wouldn't, dig it back up. Was it pain? Regret? Or had the passage of time simply made the distance irreversible? It's hard to say. Maybe for Carney, acknowledging that past would have meant confronting all the emotions he'd spent a lifetime avoiding. Maybe he felt he had nothing meaningful to offer that wouldn't sound hollow. Or maybe, just maybe, he knew his silence said more than words ever could. The tragedy isn't that he walked away. It's that those who stood beside him on that television journey never truly knew the man behind the performance. And for fans, it leaves a bittersweet mark on what was, by all appearances, a perfect ensemble, a perfect show. But sometimes, behind the curtain, the bonds we assume are there never existed. And that makes the laughter feel a little more fragile. He could have had the world at his feet, revival specials, documentary cameos, even an executive producer credit if he wanted it. But Art Carney, always elusive, turned away with a quiet nod and a soft smile, leaving everyone to wonder why. He never chased the applause after the curtain call. He never gave in to the nostalgia that so many others welcomed with open arms. For Carney, the past was a hallway with doors he had no interest in reopening. And yet, the way he phrased it once in an old radio segment still echoes, "Some stories end quietly. You only realize it when no one says goodbye." That single line caught listeners off guard. It didn't sound like bitterness. It sounded like someone who had been holding something for too long, maybe something he couldn't name. The greatest plot twist? Audrey Meadows, in her final days, revealed a sliver of clarity that may forever shift how we view the story. It was 1996. Her health was fading fast, but her memory remained razor-sharp. During a taped conversation with a journalist friend, not meant for public broadcast, she revisited her years in television with a calm honesty. She spoke of fast costume changes, the nervous energy before live broadcasts, the controlled chaos behind comedy. And then the name came up. Art Carney. She didn't flinch, but her tone changed. "I never stopped hoping we'd talk again," she said, sitting up just slightly, despite the pain. "I think he carried something he didn't know how to drop." She didn't say what. And when asked, she gave the kind of knowing smile that only people with deep history can offer. It wasn't a smile of gossip, it was one of surrender. Not every friendship ends with drama. Some just slip away. That's the kind of line that sticks with you, even more so coming from someone who had seen the heights and pitfalls of fame and still chose to lead a quiet, reflective life outside it. For some fans, that interview brought answers. For others, it only deepened the ache. Could the pressure of working under someone as famously demanding as Jackie Gleason have fractured their bond? Did Carney, who always played second fiddle on screen, quietly resent the imbalance? Yet Carney's life outside the frame was full of contradictions. He was reclusive, yet generous. He avoided reunions, but his friends described him as deeply loyal in private. There's a story, often whispered in industry circles, that he once anonymously paid a fellow actor's medical bills after hearing they were struggling. No publicity, no thanks requested, just done quietly. And maybe that's the most telling part of who he really was. Not Ed Norton, not the comic sidekick, but a man who never needed the spotlight to do something meaningful. And while he shied away from attention, his success built a life many only dream of. Carney's financial world reflected quiet confidence. He owned a sleek Rolls-Royce in the late 1960s, traded in for a Jaguar in the 70s, and eventually settled into a vintage Mercedes-Benz he was often seen driving along the Hudson. His watch of choice? A Patek Philippe, understated and timeless. Real estate-wise, he held a sprawling lakeside estate in Connecticut. Nothing ostentatious, but tastefully luxurious. Though never flashy, he was rumored to have invested in early broadcast syndication rights, a move that quietly paid off for decades. Private jets? Rarely used, but occasionally chartered for family events. His policies covered everything: voice, appearance, and even lost earnings, showing a level of foresight not often seen in entertainers of his era. Carney's financial legacy tells us something important. True wealth isn't just about how much you earn. It's how you manage the noise. He never lived beyond his means, avoided major scandals, and treated fame as a job, not an identity. That's a lesson many current celebrities might study with interest. Keep your circle small. Build in silence. Let your work speak louder than your lifestyle. Looking back, it's surreal how a show as light-hearted as The Honeymooners left behind such a shadow of mystery. Gleason, Meadows, Carney, they weren't just characters. They were living time capsules, filled with stories we'll never fully know. Carney especially became a symbol of Hollywood's quiet side, the side that doesn't ask for applause after the show ends. And as audiences, we feel that absence. We feel it in the lack of tribute quotes, in the empty chair at anniversary panels, in the space between two names that once shared a screen so beautifully, but never a goodbye. What makes it all so poignant is this: the silence wasn't filled with anger. It was filled with something deeper, something harder to put a name to. Grief? Distance? Emotional fatigue? Maybe Carney couldn't look back without hurting. Maybe Meadows understood that better than anyone. And in the end, maybe we don't need to know every detail to feel the weight of what was lost. That's the thread that holds this entire story together. Not a scandal, not a betrayal, just a question. What happens when two people change and there's no room left for who they were? The final curtain fell, and neither said a word. But sometimes, silence tells the entire story. And in the case of Carney and Audrey Meadows, that silence is the one moment none of us can forget.